point of view, out of the 3 books, the question has been asked about Historia Plantarum. So question hai, who has written Historia Plantarum? As far as this and this is concerned, iman question etyalke aha nai, right? Do you understand, Asmis? Not at all. What about you? Not at all. So the words that I am talking in Asmis, what are you doing? Just like that, sitting down in the class, Negi. Okay, so each and every word that I explained in Assamese, I have translated in English also, right? So suppose any point that you don't understand, please ask. Okay. Next, the next point about Theophrastus is he has proposed certain terms. Next point, likha. He proposed certain terms like annual, biennial, and perennial. He has proposed certain terms like Theophrastus continue koriso. Annual, biennial, and perennial. These are the words that we often use. What is the meaning of the 3 words? Annual, biennial, or perennial, or meaning kwa? Yeah. Okay, online students, can you hear me properly? Please answer the question. What is the meaning of the words called as annual, biennial, and perennial? Okay, please respond in the class. Okay, it might be like this that you are not listening it, I mean, or you're not hearing it properly. Audio problem thakile different. Kintu? Okay, annual is plants with 1 year of lifespan, biennial is plants with 2 years of lifespan, and perennial is plants with more than 2 years of lifespan. So question kiya hai? First question was who has given the terms. Second question might be give an example of an annual, biennial, and a perennial plant. As far as perennial is concerned, all the normal plants that we see, mango, guava, etc. These are examples of perennial plants. But if you're talking about annual and biennial, annual money ki, they will have a lifespan of just 1 year. Give me an example of an annual plant. Yeah, mustard could be one example. A base example that we often talk about is something called rice, wheat, etc. Right? Right? That is annual. Talking about biennial. Biennial, obviously, they will have 2 years as a lifespan. And what is some point that you need to remember? Out of the 2 years of the lifespan, the first year is always vegetative and the second year is reproductive. Right? Plant first year itself, it does not start flowering. It is always the first year that is vegetative. And when we use the word vegetative, we understand that the plant did not develop flowers as of now. Right? And the second year is always reproductive. So that's a unique characteristic about a biennial there. Next is some important plants of biennial is carrot, radish, turnip, etc. Right? So Ekhini Bostu actually has a relation with the chapter called as morphology also. Right? So I think if you have done the class, morphology class, there we have written in details. So yate details likhibo na lage. What you need to know is who has given the terms. Okay. Next is he has classified the plants. Next point. Herbs, shrubs, undershrubs, and trees. Again, not a very important point to be remembered, right? To point out one question. So herbs, shrubs, undershrubs, and trees. He has divided the plant kingdom into 4 categories. Aristotle has divided the plant group into 3 categories. This is all that you remember, right? The next point that is given, or the next point that you have to remember, is about Aristotle and Theophrastus. So Tolor, please write a line. right? So question ahe, Aristotle and Theophrastus, they were botanists, ne zoologists, ne philosophers, ne ki. So if you think that this line is very simple, let's not study, right? Kintu question has been asked about this line also. Question kene kya hai? Tahat ki asile? Political philosophers, that's the first word. Second word is Greek, right? So pay interest to these two words, Greek political philosophers. Please write it down. So this was about the second scientist, and next we move on to the third one, that is careless Linnaeus. Careless Linnaeus fully two words that comes to our mind. First, taxonomy. Second, binomial nomenclature. Is this part over? Next, third likha, careless Linnaeus. Careless Linnaeus, or question kiya hai, what is his real name? Even that point is important. So careless Linnaeus fully likha. So when we talk about father of taxonomy, it is well understood that we are talking about both plant taxonomy and animal taxonomy, right? So father of taxonomy, if the question is asked, who is considered as a father of plant taxonomy? Obviously careless Linnaeus. Who is considered as a father of animal taxonomy? It is also careless Linnaeus. So this word is more than sufficient to understand, right? Next is, what is taxonomy? I think you'll remember we have already talked in the chapter called as living world. Taxonomy is nothing but classification itself, right? Taxonomy, classification, and systematics, all the three words have the same meaning, right? So if you want to classify an organism properly, you want to know each and every details about the organism, so what you do, you go for a taxonomical study or you go for a classification, right? So father of taxonomy, careless Linnaeus. Next, founder of right? He is considered as the founder of binomial nomenclature and classification system. Out of this 2 points, it is only this point that you will study, right? Question has never been asked as who is considered as the founder of classification system, because with classification system, there are many scientists and workers that are associated, right? But founder of binomial nomenclature, obviously that's very important. After that, you need to know about the different types of books that he has written. हाँ? कुछ बोल रहे थे? ओके, अब मिला कि नहीं? फला नहीं? नहीं? Please, anyone? দুটা পেন আছে দিয়া। ইমানেই বেছি পঢ়াত বিজি যে পেনত চিয়াহি আছে না গম নাপাওঁ নেকি? কি হ'ব? Preparing for Neet, what is the most important subject? What is the most easiest subject? Biology. So easiest, does that mean we won't study? If that is the first impression that you carry, it's guaranteed you'll never be able to qualify for Neet, right? What you have to do, the easiest and the best part of Neet is you have to study the easiest part more. Yes or no? Biology is easiest. You don't have to do any sums or something like that, right? But The more easy to read, the more easy to forget also, right? Because each and everything you need to memorize, right? And is it possible that you memorize 2 books, Pura NCERT 11 and NCERT 12? So how will you remember? The more you practice and the more you pay attention in the class, obviously. Because in this class, what we are doing is you are not learning anything new. 11 you have already completed, 12 you have already completed. Notun kiba hikisa niki? Apart from certain points that are not there in your NCERT book, but the concept is something that you all have already studied and you all prepared for your exam also. So in this class, please take it as a revision class so that you remember everything that you have studied in the last years, right? So notun kibar bahire, pay interest in the class and think what you have studied. Tetia ki porisile, etia ki porisa, right? Or common comparison koriba and please pay interest. And another thing that I will say, something extra from the lesson again. Out of the 3 subjects that are required for Neet, physics, chemistry, and biology, sobore at a weak subject thake. There are some students who carry all the 3 subjects properly, exactly the same way. There are some students who consider one among the 3 to be the toughest. And as far as my information is concerned, maximum students find the problem in physics. Right? There are certain students who find a problem in chemistry also. If a student finds a problem in biology, then I will say that this is not the right field. Right? I have a problem in biology, but I'll go for Neet. One problem, no? Right? Okay. Talking about physics and chemistry, what I'll suggest, whatever is the tough subject, please don't waste your time. There might be other teachers with other opinions. What they will say, junto tough, I'm weak in physics, so I'll do more physics. Just think, 2 years, 3 years physics, you did not learn anything, or you did not get the interest, or you're finding it tough. Can you think that within the 6 months or 7 months, you will be a master in physics? So if you are giving more time in physics, or if you're giving more time in the weakest subject, apart from biology, biology is always strong, it cannot be weak. Okay, so what I will say is, now if Rakesh sir will hear that, right? Or maybe your physics teacher, he himself teaches, no? Physics kune padhai? Rakesh sir point? Or Rakesh sir. Okay, if they hear, then move to yate mari bele. But anyway, but according to me, the best way is, junto tough subject it's not that you leave the entire subject. Practice how much you know. Out of all the topics of physics, no, there are certain topics that you know. From those topics also questions come. Please practice only that. Don't go for that new things that you did not know for the 2 years. You don't have time. Instead, give the time for biology, either botany or zoology, and also chemistry. Right? Because you need to score maximum in biology. Biology যদি কমি যায়, যিমানে physics নপঢ়া, problem হ'ব. Right? So biology is easy. It is easy to remember. It is easy to forget also. It's almost like a story time in the class, no? Okay, forget both whole impression. Chalo, we come to this part, that is the 5 books. 5 books, naam gita likha, and then we'll say what we need to study. Sorry, Hortus, Hortus. Next time of Aji ji PDF likhila. All the students, what I'll request is whatever amount of the or what is the number of pages of the PDF that you have written on this chapter. I think that's all, right? The next part of the writing would be in the class, because again, if you go for timing of the same work, no, again that will be a waste of time. Ji likhila aru ni likhiba. Online students, did you get it?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. PDF এটা প্ৰবলেমো আছে ন, মোবাইলটো বাৰে প্ৰতি পিছুৱাই যাব লাগে, বিচাৰিব লাগে, নহলে ডাউনলোড কৰি থৈ দিব লাগে, প্ৰবলেম আছে। Okay, so these are the 5 books that is written by careless leaders. Out of these 5 books, 2 of the books you already know because we have studied in the living world, right? কোন দুখন কিতাপ? Living world, we have talked about 2 books. Which books I am talking about? Systema Naturae aru ki? Remember something called as 1753 and 1758, right? So 1753, 1758, they are nothing but the publication dates of 2 books. And which 2 books? Species Plantarum and Systema Naturae. What was so important about the books? Species Plantarum or Kiasile? From the content that we have studied in the living world, we remember whenever we are talking about giving a scientific name to an organism, which name is considered as valid in case of plants, it is something that was given in 1753 or maybe later. If you're talking about a name that is given for an animal, which is valid, the name that was given in 1758 and later, right? So that was the importance about these 2 books. Obviously, publication date very, very important. Now, coming to these books, first basic questions are right? It is not very important, but 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? All the books are important. So you have to talk about this one, this one, this one, and this one. The first thing, name of the books. Second question is about what is the content of the book. Question might be asked, if you're talking about philosophy or botanica, what is the content, or it consists what? Or it consists of what? You have to know that this book consists, or it had contents about principles of nomenclature. The question could be put in other way around also. Question to eneke ahibo pare, the principles of nomenclature is included in which book? Is the point clear? So the name of the book and bracket on jikini ase, the description about the book, you have to remember. Coming to this word, species Plantarum. Obviously, we hear the word Plantarum, and so it is something that is related only for plants, right? When we are talking about descriptions about the plant or giving a name of a plant, we have 2 books to be specific. Species Plantarum, it's only the names that we remember. So this is a book that you'll get only the names. What about the description of the plant? Description to kota kibo? Genera Plantarum. So in case of plants, you will see that there are 2 books, right? So naam kot ase or description kot ase specific ko bolebo. But if you come to the 5th book, Systema Naturae. Whenever you hear Systema Naturae, you have to understand that we are talking about animals. What is the content of the book? In case of plants, names were considered in one book and description was there in the other book. But in case of animals, both of it is included in the same book, right? If you see the points properly, names of animals, Systema Naturae, detailed description of the animals, Systema Naturae, right? Now, out of this books, Species Plantarum, Hunile, we remember plants, Systema Naturae, Hunile, we remember animals. So question generally is not asked about this point. Question ahe, give the book or give the name of the book which had an outline classification of plants. So out of the points, what is the most important point? Why? Because when you talk about this, we already have an opinion that this is something that is related only with animals. But you have a point about plants also. So unique point to report a question to ahead. The question is always asked on the unique point. So what is the unique point? Right? The book that had, because whenever we hear about plant, maybe if you don't know about this, whenever you hear about this word, you will have an idea as if we are talking about this one. Plants, so maybe Species Plantarum. You don't know. outline classification to put this as systema naturae, right? Next is obviously the date of publication. I don't think you have to write this point because we have already written in Living World. তাতে আৰু specifically দিয়া আছে 1st May and 1st August. Right? Our systema naturae, আৰু এটা কি মনত ৰাখিব লাগিব, if you remember from the Living World, I said that you have to remember the edition also. Which edition of systema naturae? Because there are so many editions of systema naturae. It is always the 10th edition of systema naturae which contains all this information. Right? So remember the word called as 10th. We are not writing it down because we have already written in the chapter called as Living World. So 10th edition, that number is very important. Next, apart from this, Linnaeus or aru eta bostu janibo lagibo. So we have to talk about the work that he has done. So what he has done is he has given the 2 kingdom classification system, right? Because the primitive classification system, it was 2 kingdom. Later it developed to 3 and then to 4 and like that, right? So primitive workers were always associated with the primitive type of classification, and primitive type of classification always begins with 2 kingdom. So if a question is asked, identify the contributors of 2 kingdom classification. Right? So who are the contributors? All the primitive workers, obviously Aristotle, obviously Theophrastus, obviously Carolus Linnaeus, right? So what do you need to remember? Name of the classification system and the workers behind the classification system, right? So 2 kingdom classification. Next point about Linnaeus likha, he has given what happened? I could not see. Huh? Kya hua? And when you talk about the 2 kingdoms, what are the 2 kingdoms? Right? Next, plantae. He has worked more on the plants. The entire group of plants were classified into 24 groups. Out of this 24, it was divided in 23 and 1, right? Is this understood or we have to write in sentence? Buji paitsu ne? So out of the plants, of all the organisms divided into 2 groups, all the plants were divided into 24 groups, 23 in one side, 1 group on the other side. Now this classification was based on, this is something that you have to write it in the bracket. This classification was based on the reproductive structure of a plant. And when we talk about reproductive structure, which part are we talking about? We are talking about the flower. And when we talk about the flower, then we have 2 things to remember, the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part, right? So yate, what he has done, 24 groups of 23 eta side likhisile, eta 1 is taken as a separate group. Out of this 23 groups, no? Is it 23 to divide course? 23 were the flowering plants and 1 group belonged to the non-flowering, right? Out of all the plants, he has seen that 23 groups of plants were flowering and 1 group of plants non-flowering. And whenever we use the word non-flowering, I think you have come across a word called as cryptogram. Right? Cryptograms, but cryptograms like non-flowering plants are called as cryptograms. And if you're talking about flowering plants, they are called as what? phanerogams, right? So these are the two words that you need to remember, phanerogams and cryptogams. Phanerogams ki hoy? Flowering plants or plants having flower-like structure. Now, there is a difference between the statement, phanerogams include flowering plants, right? And the second statement is, phanerogams include flowering plants and also plants with flower-like characters, right? The first statement, if we consider, phanerogams consist of flowering plants. So whenever we talk about flowering plants, what is the group that we remember? Out of the 5 group of plants, flowering plants kunbilak. Forgot about plant kingdom or what? When you talk about plants, plant has been divided into how many groups? Most primitive plants of Kibulikoi. The most primitive plant, algae. Have you heard about algae or you did not hear? After algae, bryophyte. After bryophyte, pteridophyte. Next, we have gymnosperms, and then we have the angiosperms. These are the 5 groups of plants that is included in the plant kingdom. Out of these 5 groups of plants, if I talk about the flowering plants, which group is included?
Angiosperm.
Yeah, very good. It is always the angiosperms that is considered as flowering plants. So if I use the word phanerogams includes the flowering plants. So which group are we talking about? Angiosperms. Cryptogams includes non-flowering plants. Out of those 5 groups, non-flowering kungita. Algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms. Out of these 5 groups, we know angiosperms is flowering. Identify the non-flowering. Algae, bryophytes, and pteridophytes. Then, out of the 5, 3 of them are non-flowering. They are called as cryptogams. 1 is flowering, that is called as phanerogams. What about gymnosperm? Have flower-like structure. So phanerogams of ki thakibo, you have 2 things: flowering plants and the plants having flower-like characters. Flower-like characters, we are talking about that cone that is present in case of gymnosperms, right? I think you all know, na? Naked seed, closed seed, etc., or covered seed, right? So out of these, so we understand 23 flowering and 1 non-flowering, and in the flowering group, we have certain terms. Right? Below the word flowering, after this, okay? Right? Any doubts from this section? We are talking about careless lineage. Careless lineage contribution bahut besi ase, so obviously very important, right? Binomial nomenclature, what the various books that he has written, what is the content of the book, and plus the type of classification system that he has proposed. He has proposed a 2 kingdom classification. Out of this, 1 group consists of plants, the other group consists of animals. The plant group was divided into 24 groups. It report to question ahe, into how many groups was it divided? It was divided into 24 groups on the basis of what? On the basis of the reproductive structure. And that is the reason, since this classification was based on the reproductive structure, we see certain terms called as, right? Ami keneke gom pam je eto reproductive structure upor classification dise. You have to know that, right? So if I say that this classification is based on reproductive structure, you should identify it also. What tells us that this is on the basis of reproductive structure? Because we have seen certain words called as monoandria, diandria, triandria, etc. Mono, di, tri, I think we understand 1, 2, 3, etc. What is andria? Andria has come from the word called as androecium. What is androecium? It is a male reproductive part of a plant, right? Oh, sorry, it's a male reproductive part of a flower. We have two parts. One is called as gynosium and the other is called as androecium. Androecium or fora keyword is andria. So we understand, looking at this word, we understand we are talking about a plant that has a flower, and that flower has only one androecium. This is an example of a flower that has two androecium. This is an example of a flower that has three androecium. And we know that each and every flower not necessarily has only one androecium. If something you remember from your morphology section that you all have already studied, no? So if you remember, I think you have read certain words called as didelphus, polydelphus, right? So ki hoy bahut androecium thakile, they might, a flower might have one single androecium, or it might have many androecium that are stuck into one bundle, or it might be presented, or it might be displayed in two bundles, right? So as of now, what you remember, not necessarily each and every flower will have just one androecium. It can be more than one also. Exactly the same explanation in case of gynosium also. Carpel, not necessary. There might be many carpels in a flower. There might be many stamens in the flower also, right? Okay, so we understood this one, cryptogamia. We understood what is cryptogamia. Non-flowering plants are called as cryptogams, and the group is called as cryptogamia, right? Next, another point that is important is, since Linnaeus system of classification was based on reproductive structure, so this system is also called as right? So Linnaeus Junkon classification system this classification system is called as what? Sexual system of classification. Now questions could be of two types. First, what do you understand by sexual system of classification? Sexual system of classification is nothing but the two kingdom classification system given by Linnaeus. Second question, why is this type of a classification called a sexual system of classification? Because it was based on the sexual part of the plant or the reproductive part of the plant. Is the point here. Which classification system is considered as a sexual classification system? The two kingdom classification system given by Linnaeus. Why was it called as sexual? Because it was based on the reproductive structure of it, because the entire classification is based on this part itself. Clear? So the last point, this classification was also called as sexual system of classification. So this is all about careless Linnaeus. Last point of Kilikiba, this classification system is also called as sexual system of classification. What? Doubts? After careless Linnaeus, it is George Bentham and Hooker. Either you remember the full name or you can just remember Bentham and Hooker, right? Gote namto monot narakhileo hobo. So number 4 likha, George Bentham and Hooker or Joseph Dalton Hooker. Let's write the points first and then we'll explain. পলি আৰু গ্যামো মনত আছে নে মৰ্ফলজিত পঢ়িছিলা? Anyone who remembers the words called as poly and gamo? Write it down, then we'll explain. Online students, can you see the board clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Ma'am.
Yes. Any spelling that you could not follow, please ask. Is it over? Choli likha. Okay, coming to the explanation part. George Bentham and Joseph Dalton Hooker. You don't need to remember, just remember Bentham and Hooker. First point, whenever you hear about Bentham and Hooker, the few points that should come to your mind. First, they were related with, oh, I did not write a point. First, they were related with a specific botanical garden that is called as a Royal Botanical Garden. And Royal Botanical Garden, where is it present? QE. Right? So Royal Botanical Garden. So these were the workers or the scientists that work in a specific botanical garden, that is Royal Botanical Garden. Right? What did they do there? Royal Botanical Garden ki koise? Were they laborers? Gha uthaisile niki? Ki korisile?
Curators.
Very good. Right? So the first word, important, Royal Botanical Garden. Second is they were curators. Now, what is a curator? A person who does a research work in a specific botanical garden. Those are called as curators. Research korisile. Now, while we are talking about people working in a botanical garden, there might be some people whose work is just to remove the weeds of the botanical garden. Labor kismanu thake. Obviously, laborers are present in the botanical garden itself. Is a labor called as a curator? No. A researcher who does a research work, that is called as a curator. So whenever this word comes to your mind, you have to remember the word curator. Next word. What he has done, he has given a type of classification. Which type of classification? Nature. Because if you remember, the type of classification we were talking prior to this was key classification. Aristotle key classification disile. Theophrastus key classification disile. Linnaeus key classification disile. It's always artificial, right? But after artificial, a common advanced whole, right? We have to talk about some improvement in the classification system. So after artificial, the next improved classification was obviously natural. So the first worker of natural classification, or the biggest contributor of the natural classification, right? Question keneke ahe? Identify the scientists or the workers associated with natural classification. Identify the workers associated with artificial. Identify the workers associated with phylogenetic. As far as natural, artificial, and phylogenetic classification is concerned, I think you all remember the difference. What was artificial classification? A classification that is based only on morphological features is called as artificial. What is a natural classification? It is a classification that is based on all informations except phylogeny or evolution. So if I say it includes all the characters, what is all that we are talking about? We are talking about morphological, anatomical, physiological, right? All the reactions that are going inside an organism, and also very important, remember, ecological, right? So you talk about the ecological feature of the organism and you write it down. That is what is called as a natural. What is not included? The evolution part, right? So natural classification we understood. Next, he has done a classification on what? On the spermatophytes. What is a spermatophyte? Prior to this, we have come across two words that is called as phanerogams and cryptogams, right? In nambilak monot rakhiba ne. Phanerogams we understand, cryptogams we understand. Now another name that is called as spermatophyte. What is a spermatophyte? Phyte is a plant, right? By the word sperm or sperma, we are talking about the seed bearing plants, right? Now again, since we are talking about plants, we have to talk about the plant kingdom. Plant kingdom, what, how many groups of plants are there? There are 5 groups of plants. Out of the 5 groups of plants, where can you see a seed? Algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperms. Out of the 5 groups, which group has seeds? It is it only angiosperms? And also gymnosperms, right? Because I think you have come across the words called as naked seed and covered seed, right? Gymnosperms, always we refer to a word that they have naked seeds, and in angiosperms they have a covered seed, right? So seeds kar thake. Seeds is present in gymnosperms and angiosperms. So spermatophytes includes what? It includes gymnosperms and angiosperms only, not algae, not pteridophyte, not bryophyte. Is the point clear? So spermatophytes or ki thakibo, you will have the gymnosperms and also the angiosperms. Eta group thakibo. Okay. So Bentham and Hooker has given a classification on the spermatophyte. He did not study about algae, neither about bryophyte nor about pteridophyte. Next, what is the classification that he has proposed? He has proposed a classification like this, right? So all the spermatophytes were divided into 3 groups, that is dicotyledons, gymnosperms, and monocotyledons. And this type of a classification shows the evolution also, right? Etia, Bentham and Hooker is a spermatophytor. First, what he has written? Dicots, next gymnosperms, and next monocots. Why did he write in this sequence? He could have written monocots first, gymnosperms last, or he could have written gymnosperms first, dicots last. What is the reason that he has written in this sequence? Writing in this sequence talks about the evolution of plants according to Bentham and Hooker. When we talk about evolution, we know a proper sequence of evolution. Primitive plant is obviously the algae, and the advanced plants is angiosperms. So evolution wise, ki jabo? Algae, after algae, you have bryophytes. After bryophytes, the pteridophytes. After pteridophytes, the gymnosperms, and after gymnosperms, we have angiosperms. This is a normal sequence of evolution that we study now. But according to Bentham and Hooker, there was a problem with the classification, and the problem is with the evolution of the plants. What exactly is the problem? When we talk about evolution, this should be the sequence. Kintu Bentham and Hooker ki sequence follow korise. The point is, you have to identify the problem in this classification. And since this classification had a demerit or a problem, this classification is not regarded as the best classification. Because after this classification also, there were scientists who has worked more on classification. If any classification is considered to be the best, then tatke uporot aru kam koribo nalage to. Are you understanding? If something is best, then obviously you don't have to work on the best. It's already proved that it is the best. This is not the best, and that is the reason why further scientists worked on the method of classification. Now, you have to point out what was the demerit of this classification. The hint is the demerit is something about evolution, right? The sequence is wrong. What is wrong? the placement of gymnosperms is wrong, because we know gymnosperms is a group that has evolved prior to angiosperms. Angiosperms copra evolve korise, gymnosperms opera. Algae pra ki evolve korise, bryophytes. From bryophytes, which group has evolved? It's the pteridophytes. And that is the reason why, okay, before going to this, no, one thing that you should remember, whenever we are talking about groups of plants, no, all these groups, each and every group are divided into two categories. Just to have an idea, it is the lower algae, the higher algae. You have bryophytes, the lower bryophytes example, the higher bryophytes example. Similarly, in case of pteridophytes also, lower pteridophytes, higher pteridophytes, gymnosperms, lower gymnosperms, higher gymnosperms. And similarly, angiosperms, we don't use the word lower, but even then lower and higher. So out of these, no, if you want to be more precise, which one is considered as the most ancient group of plants? It is the lower algae. Which is considered as the most advanced group of plants? It is the higher algae. Sorry, higher angiosperms, right? Next is, I think you have come across the words called as monocots and dicots. What is a monocot? What is a dicot? A plant that has two cotyledon is called as a dicot. A plant that has a one cotyledon is called as a monocot. Now, these plants falls into which category of plants? Do they belong to algae or bryophytes or pteridophytes or which group? Monocots or dicots ki hoy? Plants hoy? Kuntu group belong kore? It belongs to angiosperms. So if you are talking about this sequence, after gymnosperms is angiosperms, angiosperms divided into two groups, monocots and dicots, who is considered to be the most advanced? Duta group ase no, monocots or dicots, tahate ekelege thakibo nware, they are separated. So which group is considered to be the highly evolved? It is always the dicots. Sorry, it's always the monocots, right? So out of this lower and higher, no, what we need to remember? It is dicots. And finally, we have the monocots. So the most advanced type of plant, ki hoy? Monocots. So if you are talking about the sequence of evolution to yate ki problem ase? What is the drawback in this classification? The placement of gymnosperm. Why? Because if you see this type of classification, we understand as if dicots asile, dicots opera kun evolve korise gymnosperm, gymnosperms opera kun evolve korise monocots, but this is wrong. It should be kenekwa, the first gymnosperms hobo lagisile, that's a dicots hobo lagisile, that's a monocots. So this is the greatest fault of this classification. What is the greatest fault? The placement of gymnosperm is not correct, right? Next. So we have talked about certain points. So we have learned that the classification system that he has given is not the correct one, right? What was the problem? Problem in the evolutionary sequence. But in spite of that, ekon pura correct nohoy. But in spite of that, this classification system is still into use. So the question that is asked is, where is this classification system used? We know whenever a classification system has a demerit or a problem, that classification is never used in our research or in our studies. But in spite of that, since it already had a drawback, we should have not considered this classification itself. But in spite of that, we consider, so the question that is asked, where do you use it? You use it while writing the classification in a herbarium. Remember, we have talked about herbarium. It is a sheet of paper. It has a label. In the label, you write the description of the plant. You have the classification of the plant also. That classification that you write in a herbarium is always based on this classification and not on this classification, right? So question I have, Bentham and Hooker classification code use kore. Herbarium is the best word. I think it's written over here, no? Yeah, herbarium. And second is botanical gardens. Botanical gardens, give one example of a botanical garden, the garden that is present in a Seju, right? That is one example of a botanical garden. In the botanical garden, if you see the plants that are there, in each and every plant, they have a name tag. They have a tag, they have a description about the plant. That description, that classification is always on the basis of what? Bentham and Hooker. So question kya hai? Bentham and Hooker classification system to code use hoy. It's used in the herbarium, it is used in the botanical garden. Why do we use it? We know this is wrong, then why do you use it? Just to pay our respect to those scientists who has done a great contribution to the plant kingdom, right? Just a point of respect. So after this, কি কৰিম এতিয়া গোটেইখিনি লিখিব লাগিলে কি যে হ'ব Okay, after this part, what you write is merit of the classification. Likha. So each and every system of studies has certain type of drawback and it has certain type of advantage. Why I am saying this line? Because ইয়াৰ আগতে আমি কি কৰি আছিলো I give you the PDF, you write it down, I explain. তাত কি হৈছিলে যে you save your time. এতিয়া কি হৈছে you are writing it down in one way, you are saving your time, in the other way you are wasting your time also. So you are confused what you are doing actually. Which way is better? Previous method and this method. This method, because understanding point of view, this method is better. Right? Because if I give you a PDF, it's almost like a book that you get it. Right? You have so many books in the market. Why do you have to come in the class then? Right? But on the other hand, if you write down the PDF and do the explanation in the class, you save your time also. So it's almost like this: who came first, the chicken or the egg? Right? Okay. So let's not think about it, all those things. Just put something in your mind that biological classification is going to take time. Doesn't matter, but we are going to learn each and every word. Okay. So merit of this classification, Likha, the first one. What is the merit? After that, we'll go to the demerits. What is the merit? The first merit is it is a nature classification. Why is nature classification considered as a merit? Because out of the three types of classification, artificial, natural, and phylogenetic, simplest kuntu artificial. Apart from artificial, the next simpler is natural, and phylogenetic is slightly complicated. So since it is one type of a simpler classification, so that is considered as a merit of classification, right? Next is this classification is based on floral characters, right? So you study the flower, plant dollar flower asene nai. Does the plant have a flower-like organ or it does not have? So based on the floral characters, this classification is made. And whenever a classification is made on a floral classification or floral character, that classification is considered to be a static classification, right? Floral character or classification khonok ami ki boli kau? Static classification. Kiho karne? So if you're talking about a plant are bahut parts ase. You have the leaves, you have the stem, you have the roots, you have the flowers also, right? As the plant keeps on growing, if you take the leaves as a point of study, what you will see is as the years passes by, the number of leaves will keep on increasing. It is not static. Aji ebosorot jedi 10ta leaf ase, kali aru ebosorot maybe it will have more than 10 leaves. So this is a character that keeps on changing, right? So that character is not static. And whenever we have to study something, it's always obvious that you study a static character that does not change, right? Similarly, if you're talking about the stem might change, it might have branches, right? Today you have 2 branches, tomorrow you might have 5 branches also. So this is also a character that keeps on changing. What is a character that does not change? The flower. Whatever the year of the plant might be, if a flower has 5 petals, so obviously it will always have 5 petals itself. If a flower has just 1 androecium, throughout its lifespan, it will have 1 androecium itself. It's not like this. The first year it will have 1, second year it will have 2. No. Since these characters are considered as conservative characters, some characters that does not change. So a classification based on this characters is called as a static classification. This is the advantage of this classification system. Is the point understood? Clear? So details, I don't think I'll write. Because the question is never asked, no? Question to it is based on floral character. Our floral character ki hoy? conservative character. It does not change. Not important. Simple in nature, not important. Okay. This is very important. Do I have to write something in details or this line is understood? Are you looking for label? Placement of gymnosperms was not correct. Gymnosperms was put in the middle. It should be at the it should be in the beginning. I think this is understood, right? So phylogeny of the plant was not considered, means the placement of gymnosperm was not correct from evolution point of view. So if this is over, the next scientist, likha A.W. Ainsler. Not very important, Kintu, one line. Who has given the first phylogenetic classification? If you see, first we have started with artificial, next we have talked about natural, now we are talking about phylogenetic. So phylogenetic system first kune disile Ainsler. we have written a word called as thelophytes or thelophyta. Give an example of a thelophyte and what exactly is the meaning of a thelophyte? Thelophyte ki bostu? Bryophytes we understand. One example of a bryophyte? Eta example dia. Moss. Very good. If you're talking about a pteridophyte, ferns. If you're talking about the gymnosperms, finest or cyclospinous finest, right? Now, have you ever wondered why is it only moss that we always talk about? Why is it always ferns that we talk about in pteridophytes and it's always about pinus and cycas? Precisely, pinus we talk about in gymnosperms. That does not mean that gymnosperms or pteridophytes or bryophytes have only one class of plant or one type of plant. It is not only moss that is included in bryophyte. It is not only ferns that is included in bryophyte. There are so many other plants also. Why moss? Why ferns? Bryophyte বুলি ক'লে অকল মছে যে আমাৰ বেছিকে মনত থাকে বাকিটো বহুত এক্সাম্পলস আছে না you have the liverworts you have the hornworts etc why ferns sorry why moss the answer is because it is the most advanced form or advanced plant of that group if you're talking about ferns the most advanced type of pteridophyte is ferns that does not mean all the pteridophytes are ferns Lycopodium is not a fern Selaginella is not a fern these are lower plants, right? We always try to remember the highest one, right? That is the reason why we. Okay, coming to this word again, thelophytes. Thelophyte, for example, key. Algae. Why is algae or plants like that are called as thelophytes? You need to know the meaning also. The plant having a thallus-like structure is called as a thelophyte. What is a thallus? Normally, when we talk about a plant, we have an impression that it is almost looks something like this. It has a root system, it has a shoot system, it has leaves, flowers, etc. Right? All plants are not like this. They do not have an erect portion, prostrate portion, etc. Some plants you can hardly identify that right? They are flat, right? So they are almost like this. It's like the crust of the pizza. Pizza to kenuka flat. Right? Horizontal, vertical, nothing you can identify. Such type of plant is called as a thelophyte. You don't have a proper shoot system, nor you can see a proper root system, right? So that is what is called as thelophytes. One example of a thelophyte is algae, right? Next, we have the other groups we understand. Coming to this one, Oswald Tipo, important point key, biggest phylogenetic. Here important key part is left first phylogenetic, very important points. Second is, this is a classification accepted in books. Question ahead, the type of classification accepted in a herbarium. Caracille, Dalton, right? Bentham and Hooker, right? The type of classification accepted in books. Right? So you have to pay interest on this word. Next is, what he has done, he has divided the plant kingdom into two categories on the basis of what? On the basis of presence or absence of the embryo. Right? The group that did not have an embryo is called as thelophyte. The group that had embryo is called as an embryophyte. Now, what is the embryo? Embryo ki bostu? It is a product of ki hoy? Product of sexual reproduction, right? Embryo, how is it formed? Male gamete, female gamete fuse together and forms what? Zygote. The zygote forms what? Embryo. What exactly is an embryo? It is one cell, it is a collection of cells, etc. Ki hoy? What is a zygote? What is a male gamete? What is a female gamete? Eta cell ne bahut cells. Single cell, right? Male gamete is a single cell, female gamete is a single cell. Both the cells fuse together to form the zygote. Zygote is made up of how many cells? It is just one cell, right? It is the zygote that will divide and redivide and form a collection of cells. That is what is called as the embryo. And embryo forms what? Embryo ki form kore? You have came across the word called as embryo, right? Embryo ki form kore. It is the baby plant that develops from the embryo. I think you come across the words called as plumule and the radicle, right? Who forms that? Plumule ki hoy, collection of cells. Radicle ki hoy, collection of cells. From where is it developed? It is developed from the embryo, where you can see the embryo inside the seed. What is the seed? Product of sexual reproduction, right? Which part gets converted into the seed? It's the ovule that gets converted into the seed. When? After fertilization, right? Before fertilization to know. So you need to have your concepts clear, right? Embryo equally, you need to understand who forms the embryo. So as I said, there are certain plants that does not form the embryo. Now the question is, why do certain plants do not have an embryo, or under which condition a plant will not have an embryo? Embryo ketia hoy. When is an embryo formed? If you know the answer, you can give the answer of this question also. When will a plant not develop an embryo? We are coming slightly away from this topic, but it's very, very important to remember the concept, right? Instead of by hearting everything, you have to remember the concept. We know embryo present, then it is called as the embryophyte or embryophyta. If it is absent, it is called as the thelophyte or thelophyta. The question is, who forms the embryo? The zygote forms the embryo. The zygote undergoes dash to form the embryo. What does it undergo?
Fertilization.
The zygote does not undergo fertilization. Zygote itself is a product of fertilization. You have the male gamete, you have the female gamete, right? Fused together to form a cell. This cell has twice n ploidy, and this is called as zygote, right? Zygote ki form kore? Embryo. Coming to ploidy also, you need to remember n, twice n. These are the words that you already know. What is the difference between n and twice n? Or n and twice n denotes what? It denotes a number of chromosomes or sets of chromosomes that is present in a cell, right? You have come across a word called as haploid and diploid, right? Haploid ki hoy? As denoted by n because it has a single set of chromosome. And if you're talking about a diploid structure, it has two sets of chromosome, and so it is called as twice n. So male gamete, female gamete, haploid and diploid.
Haploid.
It is, right? Why they are haploid?
Because they'll form the diploid zygote after fertilization. So ploidy maintain kori.
Ploidy maintain koribo নহয়, question to hoy je tahate haploid kiyo?
Already
Because they have one set of
tahator meiosis
chromosomes.
হৈ গ'ল.
Exactly. Someone give me a correct answer. Exactly. They are haploid because they undergo meiosis. Reduction division, no? Duta type of cell division ase. Eta hol reduction division, eta hol equational division, mitosis and meiosis. This cell is haploid because the mother cell went what? Meiosis or reduction division. Okay. These two cells fuse together to form a two-set chromosome structure that is called as diploid, and the cell is called as zygote. Zygote ultimately forms the embryo. What is the ploidy of the embryo?
Twice n.
Very good. Hoy, and twice in to form koribo noy. What is embryo? Collection of cells. What happened, my dear? What happened? Feeling exhausted? Okay. Right? Ekdom basic bostu পঢ়াই আছো আসলে এখিনি পঢ়াই থাকিলে it's a wastage of time. I should not be explaining like this, especially in the dropper class. It's something that is meant for the first year class. Dropper যদি এনেকে বুজাব আৰম্ভ কৰো শেষ কেতিয়া হ'ব হয়নে আৰু মই যদি বুজাব নালাগে তোমালোকে অলৰেডি জানিব লাগে, you should know it before. But if you all are not answering, then what I'll think that you all don't know. If you don't know, then I have to teach. Yes or no? And if I teach, the time will go away. Okay, anyway, forget. Again, chicken and egg. Okay, zygote forms embryo. Embryo is nothing but a collection of cells. Zygote is a single cell. What is the process of formation of embryo from the zygote? Mitosis. Very good. Now the question is, embryo ketia form nokore? When will a plant does not develop an embryo? When the cell will not undergo mitosis? Yes or no? If it undergoes mitosis, tetiahe number of cells will increase, tetiahe embryo form koribo. Jedi twice ene mitosis undergo nokore, nokori pelai he directly meiosis undergo kori de ki form koribo? N form koribo. In that case, ki hobo? embryo form no hobo, right? So this is something that we are going to study in plant kingdom, right? You will come across certain words called as gametophytes, a sporophyte, gametophyte. What is the difference between a sporophyte and a gametophyte? There are certain things that will form embryo. I think you have come across the words called as haplontic life cycle, diplontic life cycle, right? So ebilake explain ki koribo embryo form koribone nokore. As of now, we are confined with just one word. If the zygote undergoes mitosis, then only the plant will develop an embryo. There are certain plants in which the zygote does not form or does not undergo mitosis, right? So zygote mitosis ketia koribo, ketia embryo form koribo, embryo pra ki form koribo, baby plant. What would be the ploidy of the baby plant? What is this process? Reproduction. What is the meaning of reproduction? Forming like forms. What is the ploidy of the mother plant in this cycle? Twice n. So everything started from K. Twice n. Ultimately, baby plant ki hoy? Twice n. Whenever a plant is with this configuration or twice n structure, the plant is called as sporophyte. Not all the plants are sporophyte. There are certain plants that are gametophyte also. What is a gametophyte? A plant that has N in the cell, that is called as a gametophyte. Just think of a condition. If the main plant is a gametophyte, it will form zygote. If the zygote undergoes mitosis, what it will form? The baby plant will have twice N. But what was the mother plant? It was N. A mother plant being N cannot prepare or cannot produce a baby with twice N. If the mother is N, so obviously the baby will have to be N. If the mother is twice N, the baby will have to be twice N. So in case of plants where the plant is N or where the cells are N, in that condition, the zygote never undergoes mitosis. And in that condition, the embryo is never formed. Where exactly can you see here? In case of thallophytes. Algate embryo form nokore. Right? First embryophyte is a term that you have to know. The group of plant which is considered as first embryophyte. Bryophytes. Right? Bryophytes are agoloke jimangur plants asile tahator ketiao embryo form nokore and they are called as what? Thallophytes. Clear? Coming back. When is your next class? Okay, we have this one. On the basis of embryo, we understood. So, thallophytes are under ki poribo? Algae. Embryophytes are under ki poribo? Right? Again, this group has been divided into two types. Take it a word likilwa. Atrachite, arutrachite, about tracheophytes. So this is the last point that we'll do, right? So according to Oswald Tipo, what he has done, he has given a classification of the plant kingdom on the basis of what? Embryo present or embryo absent. Embryo absent in case of thallophyte, algae is the best example. Embryo present, bryophyte onwards, in each and every plant you will see the embryo. But this group has been further divided into two categories on the basis of presence and absence of vascular bundles. What is a vascular bundle? Xylem and phloem. Right? So plants are xylem phloem thake niki? Na thake. Well developed xylem phloem kot thake? Well developed plants of thake. And what is a well developed plant? Obviously angiosperms. So as the plant goes on evolving, the vascular bundles also goes on evolving. Right? So all the plants that has vascular bundles divided into tracheophytes. The plants without vascular bundles are trachite. Vascular bundles kar na thake? Junbilak plants, they will absorb the water from their entire body surface, right? So ultimately you have bryophytes over here, you have pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms over here, right? So this is the classification. The question I had, the scientist who has developed a classification on the basis of presence or absence of vascular bundle. Oswald Tipo. right? I think that's all for today, right? So whatever doubts you have, please bring it in the next class. I think tomorrow also we have a class, that's extra class, right? Kali sake most probably zoology class no hoy, most probably, right? So if there is no zoology class, we'll have an extra class tomorrow, and we'll continue biological classification itself, right? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Oh yes, another point that I had to ask though, Kali class 2, yesterday evening 6:30, you had a class of zoology. I think you all have attended the class of zoology. 6:30 pra ki class korisila? We had a botany class also, right? As I said, I think you all remember, sir has already talked about it, right? Every Friday 6:30 to 8 or 6:30 to 8:30, we'll also have a botany class. But you all are maybe, I think according, I don't know, there was something problem with the routine, right? So you all went for the zoology class. So what happened is that botany class got missed. Hey, botany class to video paba. You have to go through the video. Why? Because next class will be a continuation from the part that I have left it on Friday. Ami ki topic kori aso morphology, right? Tuesday and Friday we are doing morphology. Yesterday we had discussed the next part of morphology. Ami jiholoke korisilu tar pisor part to kali bujaisu. Next Tuesday we are going to do morphology again. Which part? From the part that we have completed yesterday. So what do you have to do? Every Friday morphology class, you need to go through the video lecture, right? So that you can come prepared for your Tuesday class. So please go home and see tomorrow yesterday's class video lecture on morphology, write it down, come prepared for Tuesday, right? Because we are going to do something about this class. No, we have to do, maybe we have to take another extra class so that we can manage. But as of now, please do like this. Okay, thank you. Aji class buji pala ne? Everyone understood?